how many of you here like to run? Raise your hand. Okay. I would say that's a little more than half, which is good. Now, I'm going to get a little more specific. How many of you here, whether this is at school, whether this is in your own time, have ever ran in a race? Okay.
Just
So
today.
yeah, we got quite a few of you.
Wait, you did?
So there was a
just
guy
today.
by the name
you
of
actually
Eric
got to go outside?
Little. Eric Little.
Lucky.
Eric Little
Oh, I know this
loved
guy.
to run. Every race, or Eric Little was not your average runner. He was considered to be one of the fastest men in the world. Every race that he participated in or was in, every race that he participated in, Eric Little was expected to win because he was one of the fastest men in the world. And so one day he gets a call, or not necessarily a call, but he gets an invite to run at the biggest stage in the world, the Olympics. A chance to represent his country and a chance to win the gold medal. So he gets invited to go to the Olympics. Everything's set, everything's lined up. His moment had finally come to prove to the world that he was not just one of the fastest men, right? He was the fastest man in the world. His time had finally come. So he gets an invite, but then, before the Olympics, before his race, he found out about something that changed everything about this race. His race, the race that he was supposed to partake in the Olympics, the race he was favored to win, was taken, or was supposed to be scheduled on a Sunday. And you might be asking, Tyler, what's so significant about a Sunday? It's a Sunday, so what? For Eric Little, Sunday was not just any other day. Sunday was a day that he had dedicated to God. That was the day that he dedicated to God. Because Eric Little was a Christian, right? He was a devout, he was a genuine Christian. And like most Christians outside of Adventism, right? Most Christians in the world, their day that's dedicated to God is on a Sunday. Right? And so the Olympic race was scheduled on a Sunday, and Eric Little has a choice. He has a choice and a decision to make. He could either run the race on that Sunday, right? He could either run the race, try and achieve everything he had ever worked for, or the practice hours he put in and everything, or he could either not run the race. He could either stand by his faith and risk not just running the race on that Sunday, but a chance to win the gold medal. Just two options. And so he chose not to run. He chose not to run, not because he wasn't ready for the race. He was certainly ready, not because he wasn't capable, but because he believed that honoring God and keeping Sunday a day dedicated to the Lord, he believed that that mattered more than winning a race, even though it was the Olympics. People didn't understand him. People questioned him. People criticized him on the decision he had made. They're like, Eric, it's just one Sunday. I mean, I get it, you're a Christian. I know that's the day you've dedicated to God, but it's just one Sunday. It's the Olympics. Just partake in a race. You have a chance to win the gold medal. But he stood firm with his beliefs. And in that moment where people criticized him, people questioned him and said, why would you throw your future like that all away? In that moment, Eric Little did not fit in with society anymore. He didn't fit in. He stood alone. He looked different. He became a quote-unquote, you could say, outcast. He became an outcast. And the reason he stood out, right, was not because, the reason his story is famous, the story is popular, is not because he was seeking for attention. No, his story is popular because of his faith in Christ and his belief of keeping that Sunday dedicated to God. And so he never changed his decision no matter what. And he was actually given another opportunity to run in the Olympics, run a race on a weekday, not a Sunday, and he decided that he was going to do that. He won gold medal. But at the end of his story, the real victory was not the gold medal that he later on won. The real victory was that he chose God even when it made him stand alone in society. And the truth is that the moment that Eric Little faced is a moment that we might face too. Because if you really choose to follow God, if you really choose to have a genuine relationship, a genuine connection with God, there will be moments where you do not fit in with society. There will be moments where people won't understand you. There will be moments where you feel like an outcast. And that's what this talk is entitled today. What does it mean to be an outcast as a Christian with your beliefs? And how does it apply in our lives? How does it apply at Pine Hills Adventist Academy? But before I answer the question on how it applies, I want to go to the story of Daniel in the Bible. Raise your hand if you've heard of the story of Daniel. Exactly. Most of you, if not all of you, have probably read it, heard about it. And this story is a great example of how Daniel, we clearly see how Daniel doesn't fit in. Because it starts off in Daniel chapter 1, really. He's put to the test. The king gives him food. The king gives Daniel and his buddies food. And this food is unclean meat, right? And Daniel is a loyal person to God, or supposed to be loyal to person to God. So the king gives Daniel unclean food and a drink. And Daniel has two decisions again. He could either eat of that unclean meat, unclean food, or he could stay loyal to God and not eat of that unclean food that God does not want us to eat. And so he chooses to refuse what the king gives him, and he chooses to stay loyal to God. Right? That's only one story. And then a few chapters later, we see that the king passes a law that prohibits any prayer, any worship to any other god other than himself, being the king, that is. And Daniel knows about this, right? He knows that he's not supposed to worship. He knows he's not supposed to pray to any other god. But what does he do? He goes 3 times a day at his window and prays. He shows his faithfulness, his relationship with God to others. He stood out amongst many people. He stood out for his relationship with God, and that made him considered an outcast. Because after that, we see that Daniel's put in the lion's den. Or we all know the story. He's put in the lion's den. And this shows something. Standing for God does not make your life easier. Standing for God makes your life harder in some case. Because that's just a fact. And the thing is that God did not leave Daniel in the lion's den to die, to get eaten by the lions. And in the same way that God protected Daniel and saved Daniel is the same way that God protects us and doesn't leave us there in our situations where we feel like an outcast in our lives. Right? God shuts the mouths of the lions. Daniel walks out of there alive. And both of the stories of Eric Liddell and Daniel, the reason why their stories are famous and popular, sure, Daniel's in the Bible, but the reason why is because they both stayed faithful to God. They both chose God, and that's what made them stand out amongst other people, because they were considered an outcast. And there will be moments where doing what's right in our lives, there will be moments where doing what's right makes us stand alone. There will be moments where following God makes you be considered different. And there will be moments, again, you feel like an outcast. But the real question is, you're probably wondering, look, I understand the story of Eric Liddell, this Olympic runner, right? Chooses to stay faithful to God, doesn't participate on a Sunday. And you might be wondering, I know the story of Daniel, right? But how does this apply to my life? How does this apply here at our high school? I'm going to give you one example. At one point in time or another, whether you do it now or whether you've done it before, at one point in time or another, each and every one of us in this room have probably, I would assume, gossiped and said things we probably shouldn't have said about another person. So I'm going to give you an example. Let's say you had a friend, or in this case, let's say you had multiple friends. You have a friend group, and you guys are having a normal conversation, but in the conversation starts to shift, and you start talking and judging and saying bad things about this person or this group or that group, right? You start gossiping about people. That's not a good thing, right? We know that's not a good thing. If you were to stand up in that moment and say to your friends who are gossiping, if you were to stand up in that moment and say, hey, is this what Jesus would do? Is this what Jesus taught? Is this what the Bible taught? The answer is no, but in that moment, whether you realize it or not, you will be considered an outcast. You will be considered weird for standing up for what's right. Because people are like, yeah, but it's fun gossiping, it's fun talking about others, it's fun, but it's not right. Right? That's just one example. But there are many examples where with your friends, whether you're saying jokes you probably shouldn't be saying, whether you're talking bad about others, there's many cases where we do and say a lot of things we shouldn't say. And if you were to stand up for that, yeah, it would make you an outcast, but it's the right thing to do. It's the right thing to do. And it's okay to be considered an outcast because Jesus says in Matthew 5:14, this is on the Sermon on the Mount. This is literally 2 verses right after he states the Beatitudes. He says, you are the light of the world. Now let's break this down. First of all, Jesus is the light, right? We are supposed to represent the light. And light is supposed to, and light does stand out in darkness. We know that. And if you are truly living a life for God, you are meant to stand out. But you are meant to stand out for your faithfulness and for your relationship with God. Patriarchs and Prophets chapter 12 says, the people of God, us, right? We are representatives, or we are his representatives upon the earth. We are supposed to represent our relationship and we are supposed to represent Jesus in our lives. Moving on, and he, being God, intends that they shall be lights in the mortal darkness of the world. So we are supposed to stand out, but we are supposed to stand out and show Jesus to others. But then it brings the case, if we do stand out for God again, it brings this word, an outcast. It will make us be considered an outcast. But in John chapter 15, Jesus exactly warns us about this. John chapter 15 says, Jesus is saying, if the world hates you, keep in mind that it hated me first. Jesus is saying straight up, if you follow me or if you follow him, you will not always fit in with the crowd. You will not always fit in with society. The world rejected him, so will the world reject his followers. So the bottom line is this. If you haven't been paying attention, the bottom line is this. When you stand up for your beliefs, either beliefs in God, right, or other convictions, beliefs you have, be prepared to sometimes stand alone. And do not just be prepared to sometimes stand alone, be okay with standing alone. Because at the end of the day, God is always on our side, no matter